Welcome to Soulful Thoughts from New Zealand. I am your host, Megan Don, teacher of the Mystic Path, author of Feminine Courage and 2 other books on the feminine mystics and Death and Dying Guide. I am live here in Christchurch, New Zealand right now, in the midst of a wonderful month devoted to the exploration, conversations, and workshops and art exhibit on the greatest adventure of all. And that is the reality that we are all going to die. And the reality that we are in fact dying with every exhalation of our breath, and that this is cause for celebration. So before we move into today's conversation, I'd also like to let you know that coming up at the end of this month, October 27th for those in the US, October 28th for those in New Zealand, that I'm beginning a 5-session online course, Your Life and Death Journey, Earth Rituals for the Body and Soul. So we begin with a Celtic Day of the Dead ceremony and then move through the death myths and rituals of the earth-based or indigenous traditions and draw in their relevance to our bodies and souls today. So for more info on this, please go to my website, megandon.life. And now I want to welcome our guest today, Melanie Mayell. Melanie is an author, photographer, and death walker. In 2016, she started the Christchurch Death Cafe to encourage people to talk more openly about death and to confront her own fears about the subject. She says, "We seem to have such a fear of death and are reluctant to even discuss the subject. And yet maintaining awareness of death has so many benefits. At the very least, it can remind us of what is most important each day right now." Melanie is the founder of the conference Death Matters, which I was delighted to be a speaker at here just in these last days. It was a fabulous day with all the speakers bringing forward the many different ways of approaching death. It was filled with wonderful participants who were simply buzzing with the delight of being together, connecting, and finding their death people, their cohorts. It was a fabulous, fabulous day. And it has continued on and is continuing on with many workshops, art exhibits. I mean, it's a whole month. So Melanie, welcome. I'm so glad you could fit this conversation into your very busy schedule. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's just great. And thank you so much for the conference and all you've done, because you could feel for the participants how it uplifted them and how they just connected together so easily, so beautifully. And it was a delight to see that here we were discussing death a whole day on all the different approaches to death. And yet the energy in the room was alive. It was so alive. So now I have heard you say that you came to death through fear. That in fact, if you like, you were one of those death phobes. So I want to ask you, can you describe what that fear of death actually felt like in your body? And where did you feel it in your body?
Well, my earliest memory of death was as around about 8 years of age. My mother's father, so my grandfather, died suddenly, and the whole family was in shock and deep sadness. And it was the day of the funeral, and I decided the best thing I could do was to get ready as quietly and as helpfully as possible. And I put on my most hated dress, the one that my mother had hand smocked for me. It was an awful thing with ribbons and bows and, you know, super frilly. And I put this on as an offering, arrived in the hall as the adults are about to leave. And my mother takes one look at me and says, "You're not coming." And I felt it was like being hit in the gut. It was, I mean, now, of course, I look back and see that she was in a state of grief, and that in those days, in the late 60s, early 70s, parents shielded us from death in those days. They thought it was an act of kindness, that we were being shielded from the harsh realities of life. But as an 8-year-old, the message I got was that death was not for everyone, which is kind of ironic, because of course my message is that death is for everyone. So I felt that in my body, that, you know, no, you're not coming, you stay behind. And the strange thing after that was there was not another death in the family for at least a decade. And so I grew up never having been to a funeral, a sense that death was not for everybody. It was whispered behind in hushed tones, and, you know, it was, you know, secret rituals, and what really happens, I don't know, fear of the unknown, things leaping out of coffins, you know. It was all rather mysterious and scary and exclusive. So if I had to feel it in my body, any time after that there was a death, it was almost like a numbness. I didn't have a feeling about it initially. It wasn't until my cousin died of AIDS when I was in my late teens, early 20s, and that really hit me hard, because I truly, truly had loved him, and we had a very close relationship. But the tough thing was that I didn't actually have any framework for that to land or to process it, or to any language. I didn't have any grief language, and it had nothing. So, you know, I'm one of these people, I guess, that's a typical Kiwi, that have grown up in a funeral avoidant, you know, death phobic culture. And, you know, I call myself a death scaredy cat. And, you know, often I've noticed over the years, for fear of saying the wrong thing in the face of loss, I've said nothing. And, you know, that is true for many of us. I've heard stories of people who've had a friend walking towards them down the street. They've suffered a recent bereavement, and as the friend looked up and saw them, they crossed the road to avoid having a conversation, because it was going to be, they didn't know what to say, it was going to be too painful. You know, what everyone doesn't, you know, what we're not realizing in that moment is that we're already thinking about that person. Nothing you say is going to remind us of them and make it worse, because they're already present with us. And that just acknowledging that loss is all that it takes. Yeah.
Wow, what a way to begin, right? What a way to begin. And if you go into your body right now, because I know you've done a lot of walking, you know, and exploring into death. And if you go into your body right now, do you still feel any twinges of fear there?
I don't feel fear for my own death per se. I mean, this often comes up in Death Cafe. I mean, I see death as the next great adventure, and that's based on my own beliefs that the soul, you know, that the soul continues. You know, we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and life continues afterwards. I mean, not everyone believes that. So I'm curious about what next, and my meditational practice takes me into other realms all the time, and sometimes into death realms. So I visit and return and visit and return, and so that gets easier. Right. The first time I went into a death experience in meditation, I literally thought I was going to die, and I was so resistant to it. I was literally gripping the edge of the chair in this big group meditation process with another person. I'm gripping the edge of the chair, and I'm deep in this process, and I know I'm being told, just let go and surrender to the process and let yourself fall surrender. And I just wouldn't. I was convinced I was going to die in the moment. And literally something tipped me in, and I'm falling. Actually, it's like a silent scream. And I went through that. It was an incredible experience. But, the more you do it, the more familiar it gets, and you realize that it's not the end.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I'm really coming to, to experience and to know and to create a relationship with death as a loving presence within you. So that, we talk about the sacred presence within, or the God within, or, that sense. And it's really coming to me now that, death is also this loving presence within. So it's not something outside of me or outside of you that is going to just come in and whisk you away one day.
Yeah, I love that. You talked about that in your presentation, and I'd never heard of death being considered as a loving presence before, and I found it very provocative and very beautiful. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
The closest that's come to me is through the work of Frank Ostaseski, and he's co-founder of the Zen Hospice Project, and he refers to death as something not waiting for us at the end of a long road, but she is the silent teacher hiding in plain sight. She's with us in the marrow of every passing moment, urging us to find what's most important and prioritize our lives accordingly. And so that you've made it into more of a delicate, intimate consideration, which I love.
Exactly. And that's it. I think it's the intimacy, it's the intimacy, and to feel the tenderness of it, because, and yes, she is there beside us, and so we can create good choices or whatever we want. But that also, has a very kind of transactional feel to it as well. It's like, I better do this and this, but is it a presence we can actually rest in, and feel safe in, feel loved in? It sort of takes it to a whole different level, so that eventually, that when we do die, all we do is we're just letting go into that presence, so
I love that.
Yeah, but as you know, yes, the more we become familiar, we begin with familiarity, then we go into friendship, and then we go into intimacy.
It's the first time I've really considered it being a friendship and an intimacy. And I don't know if you've seen the documentary about this. I don't know if it might be South Korea, where they do these funeral workshops, and you well, it's the opposite of what you're talking about. So you go into this workshop for the day, you write, you get guided through a process where you write your final wishes and your ethical will, and you really sink into that you're going to die at the end of the day. And then you get led out to a field, and there's all these holes dug, and there's a coffin. I think there's a coffin in each one, and you hop in your coffin, and the lid gets put on you. You actually go through this death, you actually go through this meditational process for half an hour with the lid on top. But for me, that seems it always seems like the opposite of what you're talking about, very confronting, and it's like white knuckling, I'm going to do this if it kills me, rather than developing this beautiful relationship.
Exactly. And so now, also as a creative, do you find any kind of ceremony or rite that helps connect you, to yourself, to life, to death, to all around you? Does ceremony or ritual come into play in your life in any way?
Well, yes, more as I've got older, and that is, as I mentioned, with my meditational practices. And I mean, that's the key. I mean, that would be foundational. And I came to that fairly late in life. I mean, I have to say, I always wanted to meditate and always intended to. And while the children were young, it was on another thing on my to-do list. And, I must do that. I know it's good for me. And eventually I made a start and found that I could only meditate for 30 seconds. And then I know that just sounds so bad, but I would just, and I, over time, I thought, no, I'll stick with it. If, there are lots of famous people doing it. If they can do it, I can do it. And I just started to build up I needed a lot of props to start with. Like, I needed the right incense. I needed things to smell nice. I needed crystals and candles, and I needed absolute no interruptions. There were sticky notes put on my door. Do not knock. Do not come in. Don't even knock. And it was like I had to have everything just right. And then I found I could, and I had to have the right chanting drum beat or something that would sort of quiet my mind. And I managed to stretch it out from 2 minutes to 5 minutes and felt that was quite a miracle. But, over time, it does sound excruciating, I know. Well, over time, what I found is it got longer and timeless, and I really sunk into the process. A lot of those props ended up falling away. So I needed everything, and I needed all those beautiful things to get me in. And then once I was there, I found I needed less and less. And it's
I do want to go back to that South Korean ritual though too, because we are all of the earth ultimately, and that's what I say. We're all indigenous, really. We've all been born, I think, many times into many traditions, with many colors of skin, with, on many different soils. But I also come back, we are of one soul. Ultimately, we are of one soil. And so I'm really feeling now, bringing that loving presence is important for the death. But also then, how do we then take that to the next level and bring that into some kind of earth ritual rite that really brings the body? I'm thinking like too of St. Francis of Assisi. When he was dying, he asked to be completely naked and to be placed upon the earth. And that's how and where he wanted to die. And when I was in the Aboriginal territory in Australia, I was taken out to some of the sacred places by the Walpiri tribe. And there was an old Aboriginal woman sitting alone under a tree, miles from the reservation, miles from anywhere. And I kind of looked at my guide. I said, my God, what's she doing here? And he said, oh, she's come to die. And I just went, I had my typical white girl reaction, like, oh my God, that's terrible. Like, she's alone, she has no food, she has no water. And then I kind of calmed down, and he just said, she's with her ancestors. She's not alone. She's coming back into dream time. And so that's what they did, was they would go out, and so they would remove themselves from the human life going on, but then they would totally immerse themselves in the earth and into the dream time. And so isn't that beautiful? So, what I'm really investigating, because I think our body has such incredible wisdom. And so how can our bodies actually now inform us about what they know about death? So that to me is a really interesting question. It's kind of like, oh yeah, body, what do you want? And so that's like, oh, a whole other thing, because I kind of feel like in our Western tradition, we need psychotherapy and counseling so much because we've become divorced from our ceremonies and rites. So then there's never really any special times in our lives or or there's not the ceremonial closing or opening of things. So things kind of hang there, right? You know, so I'm kind of really starting to investigate that myself. Like, yeah, we are of this earth. And how can my body, the wisdom of my body inform me? So it's going beyond that very, shall we say, the need to hang on for life to the participation into death of this physical being, because I think that's something I was hearing in the conference from some of the elder members too, was the sadness of the dissolution of the body and the breakdown of the body and not being able to do what they used to do. And yet I also saw a transformation with those people where they suddenly went, oh, hold on, that's actually natural. And they can actually rest in that. And so that was beautiful. So it's sort of like, yeah, this wisdom. And I somehow feel it in the exhibits of the art that you have too, just seeing a little taste of them, that somehow these artists have really
the magpie piece. So that in particular is the cycle of life and death. And the for the listeners, it's this life-size magpie with a skull for a head, a clay skull with a worm in its beak. The magpie itself is black and white, which speaks to the light and the dark and the balance of life and death. And it's eating a worm, which is going to ultimately break down its own body. So it's kind of speaks to this whole life cycle, life and death, which in the animal world, you know, we don't overlay it with all this angst. It just happens. It's natural. And I think that's where we can find a lot of solace and a lot of meaning, is by being in nature through the changing seasons. And in New Zealand, we're very lucky because we have very pronounced seasons. It's not like some countries, it's like one endless winter or one endless summer. We have very pronounced seasons, which I think helps us to sink into the cycles of our lives, you know, and really look at the leaves falling from the trees in autumn, and they become the mulch. And even as they're falling, some trees already have the promise of spring buds, just the bulge of the tips. And you talk about the women, some of the women at the conference, some people expressing a sentiment of the body getting older and a sense of just that, not necessarily loss or regret, but just that focus. And I remember you saying, you know, the shift in focus to, yes, that is completely natural, but let us put our focus on what we are gaining, and it's the age of the crone, if you like, of our crowning wisdom, and really celebrate and focus on that as it's coming to full bloom.
Absolutely. Now, would you like to speak a little bit on your book, Goodbye?
The Goodbye book. Well, Goodbye the Goodbye book is what led me into death work, really. And I'd traveled overseas as I went, taking photographs all the way, looking at the world through the lens of a camera, which really became a meditation for me, because as I traveled, I was trying to just absorb everything all at once, and looking through a camera was a way of putting blinkers on me like on a horse, and I could really focus and just focus on one thing at a time and appreciate the tiniest details each country I went to. And over time, I started collating the photographs into albums by color, not by country. And when I came back to New Zealand, I was drawn again and again to the white album of images, and they gave me a sense of peacefulness and serenity. And I thought, I wonder what I could do with these creatively that might offer other people that same sense of peace and serenity. What would be the offering? And I came up with this idea of a book to offer comfort to people in times of sadness or loss. And at the time, there wasn't really anything available that wasn't either very religious and psalm, you know, full of psalms and biblical quotes, or very kind of flowery and sort of twee. And so I wanted to do something very contemporary with song lyrics and quotes and things that I loved. And so eventually this book was published, and it came out amongst the earthquakes in 2011 here in Christchurch.
Wow.
And I thought, so the book goes out. So this was the funny bit for me. The book went out, and I thought, brilliant, you know, beautiful book, can offer comfort to people. And I will just sit back here behind my desk and post them out to people, or talk on the, you know, do what needs to be done. But what ended up happening, the book demanded that I went with it. And that was a shock, because I would meet people who would say, oh, that's your book. And then they would tell me a sad story of sudden death. Someone might have taken their life, grief and loss. And so I'm sitting there as someone who's made a beautiful book, completely at a loss for words. I felt unqualified to listen, let alone talk to them, because I'd grown up in this culture of, you know, silence and death denial. So I'm sitting there with all these feelings of, a yearning for the intimacy, because they were sharing this incredible experience with me. And yet I felt unequal and unqualified to listen. And so this happened over and over again. And eventually, from feeling embarrassed at my lack of understanding and lack of knowledge, I started to feel curious. Like, why don't I know the language of loss? It's happening to all of us all the time throughout our lives. Why don't we all know how to speak this language? And then I got really annoyed. Like, why don't we know how to speak this language? It's crazy. You know, we're all these people walking around wounded, and nobody knowing how to connect. And if they're saying anything, they're saying terrible things, all these platitudes, and you know, you're over it yet, and you know. So that's what eventually led me to Dr. Lois Tonkin, and I might have voiced my frustrations to her, and she said, well, you should come and do a certificate in grief support with me. And I did. And with her, I learnt the very basics in the language of loss. And it was transformational, and it's so simple and wonderful. And I wish we could have all learnt this at a young age, and it would save so much pain and misunderstanding. And shall I share a couple?
Sure. Yeah.
So she has about 6 or 8 of these simple signposts, if you like. One of them is that we all grieve differently. Every single one of us. Grief is as individual and unique as our fingerprints. So once we fully understand that, we stop looking at a grieving couple, for instance, and thinking grief looks a certain way. And they might both be grieving the same loss in their lives, but grief may look very differently on each of them. One may be very outwardly upset, and the other person may not look like they're even sad. They may look like they're just, life continues. And then we may have judgment against them. Like, what's wrong with them? They don't even seem upset. So once we know that grief is very different on each of us, and at each person and each loss, so we can be much kinder and patient with each other. I mean, that's just a tiny snapshot. There's a lot more information about it. But another one is grief. You know, you don't have to get over grief. It takes as long as it takes. So there is this sense of, are you still upset about that? Or, that was years ago. Once we know that you don't ever have to get over it, if we all knew that to be true, then we would be a lot kinder to each other, and the language would reflect that. So just doing that training with her was incredible. And it didn't necessarily change my language or anything overtly, but it allowed me to be with people who were sharing these stories and in various states of loss and grief, without me angsting and, oh my gosh, what do I say? I don't know how to be here. And I could just be there. And it's really about being present. But I had to go through that process in order to just be present. Yeah.
And I really love that sense of, you don't have to get over grief. The minute that you said that, it actually took I felt a lot of pressure released and freedom, because I think when you are grieving, you feel like, oh, I'm still grieving. Oh, I'm still grieving. Oh, and you kind of, there's almost this little pressure of like, oh, I should be over it by now, or, oh, I should be getting on with life now. And just by the sheer fact of giving yourself that freedom, it almost allows it to naturally release in its own way. And so then it allows life to come in and to grief to come in. And so that it seems to me it's more like waves,
I think it also, when you stop resisting it, allow it to blossom, and knowing that it's going to be your own unique relationship, because your loss is unique. The person or the thing that is gone was unique, and your relationship is unique. What you're allowing is your grief to, you're going to find a way with it that might be creative, it might be, but if you're trying to suppress it or rush through it, or you're not allowing the full creative power of it.
Exactly. Now, I just want to know, for you with the conference, I mean, this is the third conference I think you've done, right? Is there anything that you wanted to share from the conference about it?
Well, yes, I would love to share this feedback note. I just plucked one at random on my way into this meeting. And it just seemed to sum up a lot of the feelings of people who were there. And they say, it doesn't say who it's from, it just says, "This is my third Death Matters. I leave feeling different. I've been challenged and pushed to look into areas that I've been opposed to in the past. From feeling apprehensive, I chose to keep an open mind. I only open my heart when I know it's safe to do so. I leave in ponderous thought, wanting to eat the apple and spit out the pips." So, hold on, there's more.
Sure.
My journey, more conversations will be had. My journey is going places I never would have anticipated. And one thing is, I so wish more men were involved in this. I think that just sums up the whole conference, and my heartfelt intention was that people could be with the content, even though they might not agree with everything that was shared, because we had quite a range of very spiritual presentations and very practical, what to do, how to have a home-based death care, what to do with a dead body kind of conversations, assisted dying conversations, and life after life conversations. So for people to sit there amongst that whole diverse range, even though they might have found some of it challenging, they stayed with an open mind, and that they could leave, and this person has written, in ponderous thought, and feel and remain open the whole day, is truly a testament that this conversation is, its time has come. The community is ready to have deeper conversations about death. And it's well overdue, but the time is right.
Yeah. And I'd like to say here too that I found the workshops that I offered, and especially on the Sunday, it was a smaller group, but the intimacy that we created together, and the places we went together. And yes, and there were some things that I did which I had no idea I was going to do, and it really was pushing them beyond their comfort, but they stayed there with it, and they did it, and then we, it was so beautiful to see their hunger, their desire for their own explorations, but also a lot of them were helping other people, and you could just feel the evolution happening. That's what I was feeling. It was like, yeah, there's a movement going on here, you know. So it was just a beautiful energy to be in, and I totally just so loved the variety of the speakers. That to
Awesome.
me, you know, because death is
Yeah.
big.
Death is big and profound. And I think that's the whole thing, as a nervous beginner, a death, I love that quote that says in the expert's mind, how does it go? In the beginner's mind, in the expert's mind, there are few possibilities. In the beginner's mind, there are many. And so when you enter with beginner's mind, I mean, I come to every meeting with beginner's mind thinking, gosh, there's more I don't know than more I know.
Right.
And that's the thing with death. You may start off thinking it's very finite and tangible and it looks like this. And the more you explore, it's everything. It's here, it's everywhere. And then you go deeper, where this conversation touching on the presence of death as an intimate friend, I mean, that's a deeper step into the water.
It is. And that may be, I might read the poem that I actually read at the conference, because it talks to that. Death, you call me by my name, so tenderly, so intimately. Every morning when I wake, you and life greet me. Every moment in the day, you and life love me. At night, you hold me in your loving embrace, wooing me into a deeper love, where I will feel safe, where I will trust in your ways. The only thing is, death, I turn my gaze away. My heart murmurs it is busy, and my mind decides death is for another time. Please keep seeking me, death. So one day soon I will seek you. So one day soon I will see you. Let me know you now as a friend, and not later as a stranger.
Gosh, that's beautiful.
So that's, I think that's the call. That's the call, and so many ways to start coming into that and trust.
And it changes your life. I think that's the thing for me, by going into, swimming in the ocean of death, if you like. It sounds so, people go, oh gosh, it's so morbid and it's so, as though it's other. And what it does is actually, it's so enriching. It imbues my life with such a sense of gratitude and presence for the tiny delights in every moment, to really pause and savor along the way, and not just, even at, you don't get to the end of the day and go, oh, let me just look back over the day. Yes, tick, 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 down the old to-do list. It's when you are meeting someone for coffee and really, they don't need to know what you're doing, but you're just present to them, maybe looking into their eyes with amazement. We're both here at this moment in time. It's someone that might be passing you the coffee over the counter, and appreciating. It gives you a sense, it's given me a sense of presence in the moment, because everything is impermanent. Nothing is staying the same. And I think that's the illusion before you do the death work. That was true for me, that things will be this way until I change them. But that's not true at all. Nothing stays the same. That is the promise of this world.
Absolutely. And so for people who want to participate, because it is ongoing, DeathMatters.nz. For those of you who would like to, there are more workshops going on. There's the art exhibit. There's online, I think, workshops also happening, so people from all over can participate. So DeathMatters.nz is where.
Yes, and lots of death cafes. The death cafes continue in Christchurch, around the country and around the world. So for people that are considering, how do I learn more about death in a way that doesn't kill me, listen to podcasts. There's a fantastic podcast made right here in New Zealand, A Death Walker's Guide to Life being one of them, Death Dialogues Project, Dr. Lottie's Science with Soul. There's some amazing podcasts out there. Maybe go along to a death cafe. You'll find them online on Meetup or on the deathcafe.com website. They happen all around the world, and it's a wonderful way for beginners to join the conversation.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Melanie, for joining us today, and just for all the work that you do by, making this an open conversation and really supplying a place and a time for people to feel safe and nurtured in this environment where they can explore and start to evolve into the greater relationship with death and ultimately the greater relationship with themselves. So thank you so much for joining with us. And dear listeners, just to remind you about that course coming up, Your Life and Death Journey, Earth Rituals for the Body and Soul. Look for more info on my website, megandon.life. Look for more on deathmatters.nz and the Death Cafes. Plenty of material out there for you to start the journey and to celebrate the journey, to really celebrate the journey, and to really feel into that, we have these animal bodies, these beautiful animal creature bodies, and they too can teach us. Come into that inner wisdom of the body and how your own body can teach you and take you into a deeper place of your own innate presence, wisdom, and joy. So I wish you all well, and we did a little, just a little mantra that we could walk with in one of our workshops. And one of those was, I breathe in life and smile. I breathe out into death and touch the earth. I breathe in life and smile. I breathe out into death and touch the earth. So I leave that with you. May you walk well, and we'll speak next month. Arhanui. Bye for now.